commerce. That ban made its way up to the Supreme Court twice in a case that'll take you back to law school, Caroline Products, with its famous footnote number 4, setting out the constitutional standards of different tiers of scrutiny. And this was when the court was moving away from kind of the Lochner era of interfering with economic regulations. And they said, it's fine if you want to ban filled milk. Congress decided that this product was basically poison, and we're not going to second guess Congress on that. So that ban stood until a district court actually struck it down as unconstitutional in 1972, and FDA did not appeal that decision. This product is apparently still on the market. I haven't really seen it. It's known as Milnot. I don't know if anyone's seen it. It's like a canned evaporated milk substitute. Skim milk and vegetable oil. There you go. Filled milk. So in the 1970s, we also learned a bit about the public health implications of consuming a lot of saturated fat. And consumers began to be interested in consuming lower fat products or products with less saturated fat. And here the dairy industry was not too keen on this and wasn't too keen on products that are alternatives to cheese and butter that are and yogurt that are low-fat products. And they fought against using dairy terms on those products. They wanted, these products to have fanciful, made-up words to describe them, like Golana or Anna cheese or other words you've never heard of because they never got adopted. They fought that fight through the 80s until the 1990 Nutrition Labeling and Education Act that Lorraine just mentioned. And then FDA passed regulations saying you can call it low-fat cheddar if you want, or non-fat cheddar. I'm not really sure what cheese is if there's no fat in it, but you can actually buy products that call themselves that in the supermarkets today. So that more or less brings us up to the present. The late 1990s, soy milk started to kind of take off as not just a hippie food, but kind of a mainstream everyday grocery store food that you see at big brand name supermarkets. And then more recently, almond milk has gotten really popular, as well as other plant-based alternatives like soy cheeses, nut cheeses, soy yogurt, etc. And the dairy industry has been against the use of these terms, any use of dairy terms in the labeling or advertising of these products. And I think the history really shows to some degree that this isn't really about consumer protection. It's really more, in my view, about economic protection of dairy interests. It's in my view, putting a thumb on the scales of the free market, and trying to make sure that these products can't really compete on a level playing field, whether it's a tax or a ban or coloring requirement or what have you, or just trying to regulate the very language that these products use. I think it's fine if you want to debate the merits of plant-based products, if you want to say they're less nutritious or more nutritious or what have you. But to have the government come in and fight that fight for you is kind of where I take the issue with this. I take a larger issue with it also just as a matter of language. It's entirely natural when language develops for us to come up with new words that piece together parts of different words that they kind of remind us of. Everyone knows what I mean when I say the word butter, right? I'm referring to the butter that's turned from cow's cream and turns into this buttery yellow substance. But no one is confused when I say the words peanut butter or cashew butter or cocoa butter. Everyone knows what I mean when I say cream. It's the milk fat that you've taken out of whole milk. But no one takes issue with me when I say coconut cream or cream of tomato soup. Probably have some other examples. Non-dairy creamer, for example, is a product that's been on the market for a while. Creamed corn, cream of wheat. Just kind of coming up with these off the top of my head. You can probably come up with some examples yourself. And then milk. I mean, Lori explained the standard of identity for milk is the lacteal secretion, basically practically free of colostrum, obtained from milking one or more healthy cows. But that doesn't preclude, as Lori identified, goat milk or sheep's milk. Coconut milk has been around for a while. Almond milk has actually been in Western civilization drunk since the Middle Ages, back before we had refrigeration, before it was hard to get milk in the cities. You would take some almonds, put them in boiling water, and you'd have a milky substance to use in cooking, and we'd call it almond milk, and not just in English. You can find it in the Oxford English Dictionary back in the 14th century, but also in French, it's milk of almonds, literally, in German and Italian. Soy milk is really more of a recent import. We didn't really have soy milk in Europe in the Middle Ages because we didn't have soybeans. But in China and Japan and Korea, that's what they called it, literally translated, soy milk, or bean milk, actually. So you see it across languages, you see it across a whole bunch of different products, and it's only natural to use language in this way. And personally, I think that food producers should be allowed to use the very same linguistic constructs, the very same words and language that consumers know and that consumers recognize. If you were to force a product to call itself soy drink or bean juice or whatever name is proposed for these products, consumers who know it as soy milk will say, wait, what is this? Is this an inferior product? I remember as a kid being amused by the name Yoo-Hoo chocolate drink, because I recognized, like, this is something inferior to chocolate milk, right? And it was. It's not chocolate milk. It's chocolate drink, and it's basically got no nutritional value. Certainly much less than chocolate milk. And people kind of get a sense of the products from how they're labeled and how they're named. And it really does seem to be an attempt to me to kind of kneecap the competition, put a burden on plant-based competitors that doesn't exist for the dominant industry in this sector, which is dairy. So I briefly addressed the standard of identity issue that Lori was discussing. And I would like to say that when you say the word milk, that is the standard of identity for milk. Everyone knows what that is. But when you add another word in front of it, that's not a violation of the standard of identity, right? Adding chocolate in front of milk doesn't violate the standard of identity for milk, because you know it's something different. It's chocolate milk. FDA actually said this when they were creating the standard of identity for milk. And the same thing for goat milk. Not the same as cow milk. Doesn't violate the standard of identity for milk because everyone knows that it's a different product. The same is true for soy milk and almond milk. Now there's a fight that's playing out right now in court. This has actually been, these issues have been in courts before, mainly in California, where they have the so-called food court, where plaintiffs' lawyers sue over any and every labeling issue under the sun. But claims have been brought in the past about soy milk and almond milk, alleging that they're violating a standard of identity, or alternatively, that these are not proper, what's called common or usual names under the FDA, under the Food and Drug and Cosmetic Act. Each of these lawsuits so far has been dismissed at the pleading stage, alleging violations of FDA labeling law under the standards of identity and common or unusual name allegations. So the plaintiff's lawyers lost those cases under those theories, so they've now moved on to a new theory, which is that these plant-based alternatives should be labeled imitation. They should be called soy milk and almond milk and coconut milk and presumably goat milk and sheep's milk and all that. Should all be called imitation milk because they have different nutrition from cow's milk. I've kind of already given away my view on the matter. This is a total distortion of what is a legitimate statute, the imitation statute, which was designed to counteract the sort of swill milk issues that Lori was talking about, the dilution of a product like maple syrup so that it doesn't have the same nutrition, or the modification of a product, taking the milk fat out of a product, replacing it with vegetable oil, and not telling people that that's what you've done. That's what the imitation provision was designed to do. You almost never see products on the market today labeled imitations because it really doesn't apply as long as the consumer knows exactly what they're getting. When you sell someone soy milk, they know what they're getting. When you sell someone almond milk, they know what they're getting. They're not imitations, they're separate, they're distinct foods. The brief that we recently filed in the Ninth Circuit makes this point and cites a whole bunch of case law, most of it from the 1970s when the imitation provision actually was used sometimes. It really hasn't been used much in the past 30, 40 years. But this is kind of a last-ditch argument for modifying the common and usual names that producers actually use on these products. Well, it's not exactly the last ditch, though, because pending before Congress right now, proposed, but I don't think it's gotten a hearing yet before any committee, is what's known as the Dairy Pride Act. And that legislation would amend the Federal Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act to prohibit the use of any dairy terms on a product that is not a dairy product. I don't think that legislation is going anywhere, but keep an eye out for it going forward, because if the current court challenges don't pan out, it's kind of the last resort. There's also the petition that we filed pending before FDA. And in that petition, GFI is asking for a much broader view on this topic, not just about milk and dairy, but when you call something a veggie burger, or when you call something turkey bacon or veggie bacon, when you call something rye bread, there's a standard of identity for bread that requires wheat flour, but if you say rye bread or gluten-free bread, gluten-free pasta, all these things, by the same theory that soy milk and almond milk are imitations, all these things violate the standards for bread and burger and bacon and everything you can imagine. I mean, the sheer chaos that this theory would create if applied across the market is just unimaginable. There are so many products that we have named to name them after other products that they remind us of. Language is messy, it has, I can't even begin to describe how complex and how many different words that our language has adapted to describe other things in terms of other things. It's, but I'm getting a little bit away from my point here and running out of time. So I'll wrap up by saying that there's a constitutional argument to be made here. Under the modern definition of commercial free speech, soy milk and almond milk, these are, names that producers have a right to use. They have a free speech right to use. And requiring them to label themselves with a different name, a name that no one understands. It's under the 4-point central Hudson test. It's especially not jumping to the end. It's not narrowly tailored. It's not direct. It doesn't directly address whatever problem this is supposed to be addressing, which is, I think, the legitimate problem would be preventing consumer deception. There's no consumer deception here. Nutrition, to some degree, is already addressed by the nutrition facts label. That's kind of the more narrow means to inform people about nutritional qualities of products. And so, if you're interested in that, read our briefs on the matter.
Thank you, Nigel, for your presentation. Yes, absolutely.
All right, good. Yes, it's really an honor to be here. It's very rare that we from rural New York ever get a chance to speak here in New York City. There have been a number of food conferences where we've submitted proposals to speak and have been told that they're really not that interested in commodity foods or what's happening in rural. It's more about farmers markets and more of the local food movement. It's especially an honor for me because growing up, we felt a very strong connection to New York City. We are part of what is known as the New York City Milk Shed, and this is a region that supplies a city with what is called a fresh milk product. We have very detailed rules governing the transport of milk, the freshness, the quality, the protein content, and all of that. When we were kids and the milk truck driver said that the milk was going to New York City, we children would run up and down the barn pretending to tap dance, saying we're on Broadway. We would hold out sticks and introduce the cows. We'd say, what's your favorite Broadway show? We just really, and for years we thought we were better than the other farmers in other regions because the milk from our farm went to New York City. So there was a strong connection between New York City and upstate New York through the Depression era. Mayor LaGuardia personally involved himself in coming to rural New York to ensure a fair price for the dairy farmers. Mayor LaGuardia at one point brought together the Borden's dealers and the Sheffield that you saw on the slides into negotiations held in New York City to set fair prices and fair treatment of the farm community in rural New York. Over time, though, the New York City community began to demand cheaper and cheaper milk, cheaper products. Into the late 90s, there was an attempt by the dairy farmers to set a pricing scheme to kind of stabilize milk prices. The New York Times editorialized that this would be a dairy cartel, that the dairy farmers could rule New York City. I don't know, how we would do that, but the gist was that we don't care as long as milk is cheap, even if it comes from large-scale corporate farms. If you guys can't compete, that is your problem. Things have changed somewhat. I see a turning point the day the World Trade Center went down. There were things happening in the city, and I attended the New York State Yogurt Summit. I sat next to guys from Cornell who told me that within hours they had been summoned to determine how much food New York City had in the event that there would be any further incidents. The food movement has started to open up a little bit to inviting us to talk with them. I spoke at Northeast Sustainable Agriculture Working Group, which is more of an urban group in Baltimore this past year, and we received a warm welcome, and I was able to bring in commodity farmers from other commodities, including the poultry producers. So I think that I'd like to give you a little more information about your milk shed. You are primarily a region of small farms. The average size in New York is 113 cows, 4,000 farms. Pennsylvania, 7,000 farms, average of 70 cows. New England, several hundred farms there, similar sizes. Yes, we do have some large farms. Nature of the land resources, 7 million acres of land, a very powerful landscape with fully a third of that devoted to perennial pasture and woodlot. The New York City watershed is serviced by farms. You do not have filtration of your water. It is so pure that it comes from the watershed, a big chunk of it which is devoted to farmland. In fact, the New York City Watershed Agricultural Council and New York City Department of Environmental Protection are in Europe today speaking at World Water Day on science-based land protection. I wanted you to know that we as dairy farmers have long maintained detailed standards in terms of our production. I'm passing this around. we produce milk with a certain, every cow is measured to know how much butterfat is in the milk, precisely how much protein, how much the cow gives. This is like a computerized sheet which you could share from one of my friends who just emailed it over to me before I left so that I could show you. I also have to give the disclaimer, my views are not necessarily the views of my employer. I'm assistant county attorney for Herkimer County, and I also have a private practice serving dairy farmers and food people, food interested people. I have not spoken about this much upstate, but I am also a licensed cheesemaker. I've received certification to make cheeses at the University of Vermont at Burlington. And there I learned about standards of identity as they're put into place around the world. Milk is a very special product. It is not a few ingredients mixed with water, stabilizers, fluids, and emulsifiers, whiteners to produce a product that you can pour on your cereal. It is a natural product, and standards have been identified around the world through the input of dairy farms, dairy processors, industry. When I talk, I can say that I believe that I'm representing the views of dairy farmers, and yes, we do take our profession seriously. I'm looking at dairy farmers around the world, 120 million of us, 73 million in India, 1.3 million in China, 3 million in the former Soviet Union. We are seeing at this point the rise of the mega farms. The largest farms in the world are being built in China, 100,000 cow farm going in on the border of Russia, Saudi Arabia, dairy farms popping up in the desert. Even Vietnam is a 30,000 cow dairy farm, and whereas we in the United States are losing farmers very rapidly. We are very supportive, and I learned through my cheese making process a lot of detail about the standards of identity. So in the petitioner's brief, they go kind of through this lexicon of words, pulling words out of dictionaries here and there, Chinese words and, words from almond milk and historical words, but there's really no need for that. We have standards of identity developed internationally by the Codex Alimentarius Commission. This is a commission created in 1962 to administer world food standards, 164 members from around the world, scientists, dairy scientists, food scientists, develop food definitions by consensus. I was able to take a look at some of the other countries and how they are dealing with this issue. I wanted to show you, here's a book from my cheese making course. This is a book that deals with standards of identity, details for blue cheese alone. We're talking dairy blue cheese, not blue cheese made out of algae or cashew nuts or any other product. We're talking dairy blue cheese. Canada has much more stringent labeling, they identify with milk as a product of a dairy cow. Lacteal secretion is the normal lacteal secretion. I spoke with counsel's office at Dairy Canada. The same almond purported pseudo milk in the United States is labeled as almond drink in Canada and the UK. They do not allow this naming by reference. If you're going to sell it as almond drink. It's on the shelves there. So you can see almond breeze label one way here in the United States. If I drive a few hours north over into Ontario, it'll appear differently there. Through my Twitter account, my UK dairy farmer friend sent me pictures in the UK. It's the same thing. European Union has just ruled against modifying dairy names by adding on veggie cheese, veggie cream cheese, veggie this, veggie that, noting that the application of a dairy name cheese is to be designated reserved by EU law for animal products. And this was a case called Tofu Town, in which attorneys from Greece, Italy, and Germany submitted backup briefs to the European Union asking that the standards of identity for true dairy be upheld. I also took a look at India because that is a particular area of interest of mine, and I found, I went online and I copied off the regs there, same thing. The only modifier was raw milk because of the sale of raw milk throughout India. I found the Chinese standards, very detailed standards in China, especially in light of their problems that they've had with melamine being added to milk or things like that. In order to export into China, there are very, very detailed regulations on what. And now you speak Chinese?
I do.
Okay, good. Yeah. So I thought I'd probably show it to you at some point. But the details were all related to a dairy milk product. So I can say that it is the standards that have been set in the United States by the Secretary, who then delegates to whatever entity to determine the standards of identity. The standard where you then add a modifier would really kind of render these standards of identity moot. So the brief also mentioned, or petitioner's brief also mentioned the reasonable consumer here and there. The reasonable consumer would understand this or that. Well, I've practiced in front of many administrative agencies. The standard is set by experts in their field, say in the area of environmental law. It's not the reasonable polluter who determines the standard, and it's not the reasonable restaurant owner who determines the standard. Standards are set by experts, and this is how administrative law normally goes on. I think it would create chaos to begin the reference naming. And we already are seeing that. I've had consumers ask me, is almond milk, does that mean it has almond flavoring mixed into the milk? So that's one take that someone asked me. But there is confusion in the marketplace as to nutritional standards. I did pick up a brief on the internet, which I would like the Bar Association to post as a resource alongside the brief of the petitioner. In terms of the nutritional content, there have not been any standardized rules or regulations determining what is the content of, say, almond milk versus a dairy cow milk. You can know exactly what it is. I did find a study, if any of you are interested in it. It's not a dairy funded study to my knowledge. It was based out of McGill University, and it was comparing plant-based alternatives faring nutritionally compared to cow's milk. So it said they're popularly advertised as healthy and wholesome, but little research has been done in terms of understanding the nutritional implications of consuming these milk products, these milk beverages in short term or long term. Consumers associate the alternatives as a direct substitute of cow's milk, which might not be true in all cases. So you would really need to, as a consumer, be extremely knowledgeable or really study your labels to determine if what you're pouring on your kid's cereal is the nutritional equivalent of a certain dairy product. There was something else that I caught in the brief when I was looking at it last week. One thing is that this is somehow the dairy farmers sticking to their guns on terms of labeling our product is somehow hurting small innovators. I think that's very far from the truth. The people who are investing in some of these products are among some of the wealthiest men in the world. We have Bill Gates and Li Ka-shing. Some of the PayPal executives are investing in the new product, the laboratory brewed product called Perfect Day. And this will be a proprietary type of product that is not I guess what we would call open source technology like the dairy cow that is used around the world from India to the United States. The Good Food Institute likes to tweet. They frequently tweet about Tyson Foods is getting into plant-based, global leaders. This large-scale company is getting into that. So I work with the farmers and the ranchers. We are not globalized corporations. We are people who believe in the integrity of our product, and we intend to defend it. I also believe there's a good deal of misrepresentation on the labels of some of the plant-based products. Food systems are complex. Food, fiber, fodder, forest, and in the case of New York City, filtration. I have noticed on some of the labels comments, like I saw on the Perfect Day website, milk is an industrial product, and they show a picture of 100 cows on this rotating milking parlor. But it is not in New York. It is the product of the lands that serve your own watershed. I've seen some of these products labeled as purely vegan. Okay, well, almonds, my friend just returned from California. 2/3 of the volume of the almond is a husk, which is ground up and sold for cow feed, and the remainder being mixed in with the other things to make a pseudo milk. I don't see how that's vegan. I also do not, there's something that I am not very in favor of. When my resume was read, I represented an endangered insect in New York. We are seeing 60% of the nation's bees hauled to California every year to pollinate the massive almond groves. Our beekeeper believes, and I've talked to many other beekeepers, that this tends to congregate bee problems, bee illnesses, shared all in one spot in the 5 or 6 counties that produce almonds in California, creating havoc in some of the ecosystems here in New York State. The new product Oatly, I spoke with them. I asked them what they do with the remainder of the oats after they run it through their pseudo milk processing unit. They said they send it out to be fed to pigs. So I don't see how some of these products are truly separate from animal agriculture as portrayed in the label. I would also say that yes, the terms have been going on for a long time in the United States, the knocking down of our standards of identity, but that's really not a reason to now allow the terms to be used. Yes, the United States is probably the weak link in the chain of labeling of true foods. We are also the country where we don't have country of origin labeling on our meat, where you as a consumer can't know what country your meat comes from. When you go to the grocery store, it could be a mix of burger from Argentina, Brazil, the United States, or wherever. We are also a country that is negotiating to do chicken in China. We're also a country where the antitrust considerations have gotten so out of hand in the United States that a handful of companies control a good portion of our food supply. I listened to testimony at the antitrust hearings in agriculture. Walmart controls 25% of the retail food sales at this point. 4 beef companies control. We've seen exposés on fake organic coming in from overseas. We're also witnessing an infrastructure that is being created up and down the East Coast, the increase in refrigeration capacity to increase foods coming in from overseas, primarily cheaper fruits and vegetables. So I don't think that just because these products have been named and use the reference names for 20 years that that's really a reason to back down on our standards. I do have a few recommendations. I think I'm running out of time here.
You're good.
I'm still good, okay. I wanted to say that I do have a few words to urban people who are interested in food. First of all, I would like to say let us dairy farmers compete on an equal playing field. We are highly regulated in terms of the names we use, the percentage of fat, the percentage of protein, the percentage of moisture, anything added to make the cheese, to make the dairy product. It's a wild west in terms of the dairy products. I spoke with some of the pseudo products. I spoke with some of the processors who told me that it's very easy to switch over to make another product. You don't have to really say, well, how many almonds? Is it 6 almonds, 8, 10, 5? Is it 2% almonds? How many peas go into it? Oats is at $2.60 a bushel now, so for 8 cents you can mix a pound of oats with fluids and filter it or do whatever it is to make a product. I don't see how that's a level playing field. We're also looking at global markets. We are constantly told as dairy farmers that you have to produce cheaper and cheaper if you want to compete on global markets. So we have tried to compete on global markets, but we need to comport with the standards that are commonly used globally. For example, from my own little small town, Mercer's Ice Cream was exporting to China some ice cream. It's a pure dairy ice cream mixed with wine, a wine-flavored ice cream that is being sold and brings economic value back to our community. And I also, we listen to some of the entities kind of hector us for standing up to what we believe in terms of whether it's a standard for meat, whether it's a standard for milk. And yes, we are talking to our legislators, as is the right of every constituent to speak to their legislators. And I will be speaking to Senator Gillibrand about the Dairy Pride Act after I listen to the Good Food Institute